Today we meet Isaac Allerton, a fallen saint of Plymouth and one of the most complex figures of all the pilgrims. I'm your trainer, Lori Coffey, and an avid pilgrim researcher. I'm a pilgrimophile. There are no monuments to him in Plymouth or anywhere. However, he left quite a legacy. Isaac Allerton created a thriving fishing industry for Massachusetts. He discovered what has become an important life-saving station. By signing the Mayflower Compact, he helped to weave representative government, popular elections, and the rule of law into the fabric of American society. That's a feat. Isaac Allerton was a tailor, mariner, merchant, burgher, negotiator, and diplomat, both an Englishman and a Dutchman. A resident of New Plymouth, New Haven, and New Netherland, he was an important, energetic, and enigmatic entrepreneur. In fact, some have said he helped to make Manhattan what it is today, the island at the center of the world. And as the father of New England commerce, he created a booming economy for the area based on innovative trade practices. So how did he become a fallen saint? Let's see the rest of the Isaac Allerton story. 14 generations ago, my ancestor, Isaac Allerton, was part of the Mayflower experiment. Can you call Isaac your ancestor? Often we are guilty of judging history based on an on-off switch of choices and actions, much like the ancient church did. Do we still look at someone in history and think good or bad? After all, they were humans just like us. Are you filthy rich or destitute? Somewhere in between? Me too. Humans come in a wondrous variety of colors. So do our actions. Today, we'll add color to the Isaac Allerton story and see where he lands. Isaac was a pilgrim, and religion is the key to understanding the pilgrim story. Devout priest and Bible scholar, Martin Luther, famously nailed on the church doors his condemnation of the church for selling redemption of sins to the rich. When the church condemned Luther and officially banned anyone from defending his ideas, a schism split Christianity that still exists. The movement gained traction in England when King Henry VIII divorced not only from his Roman Catholic wife, Catherine of Aragon, but also from the church, creating the Church of England, or as we call it, the Episcopalian Church. For the first time in history, curiosity develops throughout the people to become seekers of what religion could be. The crown was not amused. Near Nottingham, where stories of the economic dissident hero Robin Hood were born, another story is beginning, the story of religious dissidents and their smart and cultured hero, William Brewster, the first of the Pilgrims. Educated at Cambridge to learn about the Bible and the law, William saw many divinity students acting like frat boys, not devouring the Holy Scripture, and he fears for his church as a result. This begins his spiritual search for truth. William and his wife Mary, future in-laws to Isaac Allerton, invite friends and family to meet and learn about the forbidden Bible from dissident ministers like youthful John Robinson, who earned a master's degree in the Bible and will debate its meaning with anyone who challenges him. He never loses. As a result, he gains a reputation as the Bible scholar who says, I have a burning desire shut up in my bones to separate from the Church of England. At illegal religious meetings called conventicles, against the law of the official Church of England, seekers are discovered, arrested, and even executed. It's dangerous to meet in the open. Under the cover of darkness, the Brewsters invite others to their home, Scrooby Manor, to listen. People come from miles around, like 12-year-old orphan William Bradford, long before he will become Isaac Allerton's boss as the second elected governor of the Pilgrims, who Mary and William take in to raise and protect. He follows them when they escape to the Netherlands. You can see the history of these early pilgrims and the religious persecution based on what the Brewsters named their children. First, Jonathan, no persecution. He was a mentor to young William Bradford and will become Isaac Allerton's best friend. Then daughters, Patience and Fear, just before they flee to the Netherlands. Fear will become Isaac Allerton's second wife. Then sons Love and finally Wrestling. Should we stay or should we go? Here's a hint. They go. Radical nonconformists of all visions are inciting rebellion by finding new ways to interpret the Bible. They share their ideas under penalty of persecution and prison. Even 150 miles from the birthplace of the Pilgrims, in the tiny town of East Bergholt, where its inhabitants have become well known for Protestant radicalism. At least one Allerton was burned at the stake during the reign of Bloody Queen Mary. 19 years later, her sister is on the throne. While Queen Elizabeth I is in power, the plague is more powerful, still killing 15,000 Londoners. And while she is more tolerant than her sister was, people are still dying for their religion. With this backdrop, Bartholomew Allerton, a hardworking tailor, and his wife Mary start their family. Sarah Allerton, the loving older sister, and young Isaac grow up learning all aspects of their father's trade. Some people have assumed that fellow pilgrim John Allerton, who's a house carpenter, is Isaac's brother. Here are 3 compelling reasons why many people, including me, don't think he is, even though he was on the Mayflower. First, John's last name was spelled Alderton in many of the records, but as there were no spelling conventions yet, that's not good enough reason by itself. Second, he is not found in the records of East Bergholt, while Sarah and Isaac consistently appear with their parents. Finally, he's not listed in the detailed Dutch records at Sarah's or Isaac's wedding. Wouldn't a brother attend? Maybe a cousin, but probably not a brother, so we won't be discussing John today. Isaac and Sarah do grow up as friends with future Mayflower passenger Elizabeth Barker, who later becomes the first Mrs. Edward Winslow. Isaac is educated enough to read a book and sign his name, and he has some experience with numbers. Now, that's a lot of experience right there. From his father's tailoring business, but he clearly wants more out of life. East Bergholt is a short boat ride to Harwich International Port, which will become birthplace of the Mayflower, and where Isaac would have seen both gunships and merchant vessels from around the world. Even with a limited education, Isaac has big dreams for himself and wants to escape the tedious life of a tailor. At 20, he heads to London with Sarah, where Sarah gains a husband, John Vincent, and Isaac gains an apprenticeship. An apprenticeship is a contract to help and learn from a professional tradesman, as you probably know. In this case, blacksmith James Glynn. The wages are low and the work is dirty and hard, hammering and forging white-hot steel into useful tools, requiring precision, coordination, and a lot of strength. After just 2 years into a 7-year apprenticeship, like Benjamin Franklin after him, he breaks the contract. And they all flee to Leiden, the city of 44,000 refugees in the Netherlands, where they join that group of radicals we know as the Pilgrims. 3 years before, 30 families led by John Robinson and the Brewsters had secretly packed their belongings and furtively escaped to Amsterdam to partake of freedoms to follow their own congregational religion. However, this is not religious utopia. Other separatist groups have already moved there, trying to develop their own religion. For example, 2 brothers in one congregation, the Ancient Brethren, get into a huge feud. One is a pastor, the other a parishioner. The pastor marries a rich widow who likes pretty clothes, lots of lace and silk and fancy jewels, which most of the parishioners cannot afford. And she wears a stiff ruff, like royalty, and they're oppressors. The new Pilgrims call the starch that makes these ruffs the devil's soup. Another issue is about a lay leader who is taking advantage of the lonely widows. As a result, they create 2 unwavering rules for the new Pilgrim religion. No fancy clothes, and widows must marry soon after their husband's death. Because of these issues, the whole church leaves Amsterdam and moves to Leiden, where Isaac, Sarah, and John join them. Living under the theme of peace and unity, John Robinson's congregation grows to 300. They don't meet at this church. This was their view of it. They met nearby in a courtyard on Stink Alley, and later at a spacious house called Green Gate, where they built a whole bunch of little apartments in the back. Like the other refugees who are working around them, the Pilgrims are mostly illiterate workers, only allowing them to take mostly menial jobs in the town's prominent textile industry, like carding wool or dyeing fabric. To work a good job as a craftsman or merchant, you have to become a burgher or a citizen of the town, and then of the Netherlands, and join a guild. To join a guild, you have to be elected to join by the other members. Elections? That's a novel concept. Mostly speaking only English, what work can the Pilgrim refugees do? Because William Brewster was educated at Cambridge, he's able to teach English at the local university. But his fame and infamy comes with writing and printing. Along with Thomas Brewer and Edward Winslow, who was just 14 at this time, they publish a booklet speaking out against the English Church of King James, which makes Professor Brewster a wanted man. So in 1618, he goes underground back in England where his contacts are. Thomas Brewer turns himself in and eventually spends 14 years in prison. Edward Winslow grows up. William Brewster's son, Jonathan, is making his way as a ribbon maker, plus he helps with their growing church. Young William Bradford learns to become a corduroy weaver. He marries young Dorothy May, and she has their baby, Jonathan, named after William Brewster's son. William Bradford becomes the first Pilgrim burgher in 1612. Diggory Priest is a hatter and the second Pilgrim to become a burgher. He seems to enjoy the law and appears as a court witness in many legal actions. Diggory is in business with Godbert Godbertson, also known as Cuthbert Cuthbertson, that one's hard to say, from the East Country, which will eventually become Poland. Diggory and Godbert later become in-laws to Isaac. Isaac Allerton has gone back to the trade of his father and works successfully as a tailor. Among other goods, he made a gray and crimson cloth cloak with gold braid and silk ruff for Nicholas Claverley, for which he got 64 guilders and 14 stevers. It was in a court proceeding, that's why we know. But his heart is not in tailoring. He has too many ideas for the workroom. Then Sarah's husband, John Vincent, dies, leaving Sarah a young and childless widow. To prevent temptation, as we heard, the Pilgrims are encouraged to remarry quickly. Sarah marries the hatmaker and burgher, Diggory Priest, but Diggory is a bit of a tattletale. At the local taverns, it seems Diggory would overhear men boasting about their conquests, and he would then take them to court over it. He got into a shoving match with one offender, but Diggory got a witness to admit that he only touched the guy's jabot. Phew, that made him happy. And 24-year-old Isaac was happy when Mary Norris from Newbury in England said yes. They share a double wedding with Sarah and Diggory. Lots of their friends are marrying around this time, so Isaac, Mary, and Sarah are witnesses at several weddings, attesting to their ever-widening friendship circle. As a good wife, Mary encourages Isaac in his work. After all, he has a growing family, starting with young Bartholomew, named after Isaac's father. Mary reminds Isaac of his responsibilities by naming their next child and first daughter, Remember. Remember, lover, you have people at home who adore you. Or perhaps she said, Remember, dude, you've got a family to support. But most likely, as pilgrims, they were really remembering that Christ died for our sins. Either way, on February 7th, 1614, Isaac Allerton, Englishman from London, became the third and final pilgrim to become burgher of Leiden, giving him more rights and responsibilities than just an ordinary resident. This will also serve him well in the New World. Isaac and Sarah's close friend from back home, Elizabeth Barker, marries Edward Winslow, printer and assistant to William Brewster, all grown up. The witnesses are their good friends, Isaac Allerton and Jonathan Brewster. Isaac is now tight with Pilgrim leadership. Elizabeth Winslow creates her will, which of course names her husband as overall heir. But she also bequeaths money to her friend Isaac Allerton and names him as an executor, along with John Carver, future Pilgrim governor. In 1619, Isaac agrees to take on an apprentice, 12-year-old John Hook Jr., son of Alice and John Sr., who has died. Alice's new husband wants to indenture the boy for 12 years. It's a long time. In exchange for the work young John will do, Isaac must arrange for him to learn to read and write, to raise the boy in the new Pilgrim faith, and of course to provide bed, boarding, and clothing. Young John agrees to not work for anyone else, neither in Leiden nor elsewhere. That's an interesting codicil. I wonder if Isaac signed a similar contract when he was apprenticed as a blacksmith. 1620 brings big changes to the growing congregation. Mary and Isaac have added little Mary to their family and are expecting their fourth child. Unfortunately, they have also had to bury a young nameless son in May. After living in the Netherlands for 10 years or more, the Pilgrims have learned about Leiden's October Day of Thanks to remember the city's deliverance from a Spanish siege. They have learned about civil weddings instead of church weddings, and they have learned how to be tolerant of people from other nations like Dutch, Swedes, and French. But their children are becoming friends with the freewheeling Dutch. They are happily experiencing all the freedoms that allowed the separatists to move there. The Pilgrims are horrified at what their children are becoming. They are becoming Dutch, so they start thinking about moving. They plan to form a new colony in the New World where they can be free to practice their own religion as English. They say nay to a request from the Dutch government to plant the colony for them. They don't want to be Dutch. Led by William Brewster, Isaac and 37 other husbands and wives will be the planters, also known as the Saints, who will board a ship, head to America, and plant a colony. But they're poor, and they need help paying for the voyage. Remember John Carver, the Pilgrim who shares Elizabeth Barker's will with Isaac? He and Robert Cushman, the offices of Cushman and Carver, go back to England to find the money men, led by Thomas Weston, who gets merchants to invest the 7,000 pounds to cover the expenses of the planters. But they are not angel investors. They charge as much as 30% interest, as much as a high-interest credit card today. Guess how much those 7,000 pounds are worth today? $2 million, all on a credit card. Yikes. The second faction of Pilgrim planters were known as the Strangers. While they also want to separate from the Church of England, the Saints don't know them at all. But the Strangers help pay the bills, so the Saints put up with them. Both planter and merchant adventurer, Christopher Martin didn't just buy a ticket, he invested in the whole venture. As a result, Thomas Weston appoints him governor of the travelers and purchasing agent for all their communal provisions. When the Pilgrims ask him about his questionable decisions, he angrily refuses to answer them. He is hated equally by all. He offends both the Pilgrims and the sailors on the Mayflower by his ignorant meddling and controlling things that he doesn't understand, that some sailors threaten to mischief him. Good grief, what a fiduciary. The Saints board their own ship, the Speedwell, in Delfshaven on July 22nd, 1620. Then they head to London for the Strangers on the Mayflower. They stop in Southampton to get the outlaw William Brewster and his valuable cargo of books and livestock. Then they head to sea, where the Speedwell leaks like a sieve, so they return to Plymouth, consolidate into the Mayflower, and finally head to sea on September 6th, 1620. 1 month in the English Channel. 1 month of food gone. These provisions were meant to hold them for an entire year until they get new crops the following year or supplies for the next few ships. In addition, the English harbor masters charge taxes to feather their own beds, taking the most valuable and easy to steal goods from the ships. There goes most of the cooking butter. Isaac Allerton's family, along with all the others, are squeezed into the newly created area between the main deck and the cargo deck. No portholes and no privacy. Only 1/6 of their Leiden congregation, 102 men, women, and children, saints, strangers, and servants, are on the Mayflower. Isaac and pregnant Mary bring their 3 young children, and Isaac's tailoring apprentice, John Hook, who is now 13, plus 11-year-old serving boy, William Latham. They are traveling with Isaac's sister's husband, Gregory Priest, and their lifelong friend, Elizabeth Barker Winslow, with her husband, Edward, plus George Sewell, his assistant, their serving boy, Elias Story, the ward Ellen Moore, plus Edward's brother Gilbert. It's quite a little entourage. After they have arrived in the New World, they discover it's not Virginia. Their charter from King James says they have the authority to go to Northern Virginia. Instead, it's the hook of Cape James, also called Cape Cod, the dark, lonely wilderness of Massachusetts, and they are afraid to get off the ship. Everyone is on edge. The men begin to fight about whether to go on a VA or stay in MA. They try to head south, but the shoals are too dangerous for the Mayflower to navigate. But if they stay in Massachusetts, they have no legal authority to be there. Some say that's okay. They don't need anyone's authority. They finally agree to stay, but want it committed to writing. They call this their 1620 agreement between the planters. We call it the Mayflower Compact, one of the foundational documents of American liberty, giving them the right to elect their own leaders. Even in England, they didn't have the right to vote unless they were lords in Parliament, which they were not. They learned this from the Dutch and Isaac, who went through the Burger process. 41 men signed the agreement, saint, stranger, and servant. The fifth signature is Isaac Allerton. He is well liked and well respected. Unfortunately, they have arrived during one of the harshest Massachusetts winters in a century. It took them a month just to decide where to build their homes. So they continued to live and die on the freezing, cramped, stinky, damp Mayflower until spring. Sadly, in the 1600s, 1 in 3 women died from childbirth. On the Mayflower, it was Mary Allerton and their baby boy, leaving 8-year-old Bartholomew, 5-year-old Remember, and 2-year-old Little Mary motherless. They wouldn't be the last of the orphans. The passengers and the sailors are dying from an unknown sickness. Only 52 pilgrims survived the winter, including Isaac Allerton and his children. John Hook, the tailor's apprentice, dies, leaving young servant William Latham to do all the chores. Gregory Priest, Isaac's brother-in-law, dies. The Winslow brothers and George Sewell live, but their childhood friend Elizabeth Barker, along with her ward, Ellen Moore, and their young servant, Elias Story, all die. It was a devastating winter. The appointed governor, Christopher Martin, and his family all die from the sickness, no mischief required, just a pandemic. Because of their compact, the Pilgrims hold their first elections. Their choice for governor? The people pleaser John Carver of Cushman and Carver. His wife Catherine was a popular midwife, helping with countless Pilgrim births, although they didn't have children who survived childhood. Sadly, both the governor and his wife die in the spring. But Isaac and his friends remember their duty caring for family and community. In the second election of the New World, William Bradford is voted in as governor and is re-elected on and off for 30 years. He reigns longer than most British kings. Isaac is elected his assistant governor and is re-elected for 12 consecutive years. No term limits back then. After all, they were used to kings serving for life. In the spring, when the Mayflower, their lifeline, returns to London, it carries no cargo except rocks for ballast. None of the planned bounty of the land to help pay their debt. How could they, when half of them died? At least the captain leaves the shallop for them. The shallop is both rowboat and sailboat. In September, when the 4 women that survive are planning the first Thanksgiving, 14 of the 22 surviving men, including Isaac Allerton, decide to explore Massachusetts Bay. Their goal is to discover and view that bay and trade with ye natives. As they get closer, Isaac points out a good spot for a lookout to see the entire waterway. They name it Allerton Point and has been an important safety location ever since. With the sickness behind them, the Pilgrims are desperate to pay off their crushing debt of the voyage. When supply ships arrive, though, they bring a cargo of nothing, just more mouths to feed. The money men determine to not send any supplies to the Pilgrims until they start paying off their debt. How do you think they feel about Thomas Weston and the money men now? A letter from him arrives on the Fortune with a tongue lashing, asking why they haven't sent goods back with the Mayflower. He accuses them all of loafing. This is the year half the Mayflower has died, and the rest have to cut their meager food rations in half and then share them with these new arrivals. This is their year of starvation. The merchant adventurers expected the Pilgrims to pay off their $2 million debt the year half of them die. And they planned to. The Pilgrims' primary goal after survival was paying off this crushing debt. So the survivors barter with the natives, and while trying to build their own shelters, work to collect raw materials that have value. They send the fortune back with a cargo full of beaver pelts, hewn lumber, and sassafras that will pay off a third of their debt, $666,000 worth. But it is hijacked by a French warship in sight of the English Channel. The thieves take all their goods except the embellished retelling of their adventures so far, sent on to their friend Thomas Morton, who publishes it. Pilgrim PR. This retelling or relation of the story brings even more immigrants to the colony, who are shocked to see the gaunt faces and threadbare clothing of deprivation in Plymouth. The money men send no supplies, since the Pilgrims have sent no goods. But they do send Isaac Allerton back to England to renegotiate a discounted payment by 1627. They have proven their ability to monetize their industrious efforts, and now they are thrilled that he is successful in negotiations. Now they need someone to account for it all. Where would you look for a trustworthy accountant? From the sales team? I wouldn't. Does this man seem to have the right background for an accountant? Would you hire him? A lot of people like him, so he gets the gig. He also gets the girl. His buddy Jonathan Brewster's sister and William and Mary's little girl, Fear, has grown into a kind, loving 20-year-old. She arrives with many of the Pilgrim family members on the Anne. When she sees her 39-year-old friend from Leiden and his 3 little orphans, she agrees to take on his duties as a wife. Having Elder Brewster as a father-in-law raises Isaac's stature substantially in the colony. Isaac has married up. Now that he's part of the prestigious Brewster family, Pilgrim leadership entrusts him with not just the payback, but all their financials and industry. With access to all those provisions, Isaac becomes a merchant and moneylender too. Unfortunately, he also becomes a fox in the henhouse. Every time Isaac returns to England to buy more provisions for the Pilgrims, he also buys for himself, all on the same Pilgrim tab. Of course, planning to pay it back, but one of the first rules of being a fiduciary is to never commingle ye funds, nor ye goods. Otherwise, you start to think of it as your own and quietly become rich. While the communal Pilgrim debt that you're supposed to pay off keeps growing. In the meantime, Fear gives birth to little Sarah, named after Isaac's sister. In 1627, Isaac Jr. joins the family. He's especially adored and educated by his grandpa, Professor Brewster, still the spiritual leader of the Pilgrims. Junior grows up surrounded by his half-siblings and many Brewster cousins as well. Jonathan marries Lucretia Oldham and provides 9 of those cousins. Patience marries Thomas Prince, future governor and Isaac's boss. They provide 4 of the cousins. Fear and Isaac, of course, have Sarah and Junior. While Wrestling died young with his mother, Love marries Sarah Collier and provides 4 of the cousins. Isaac's sister Sarah has arrived, bringing her daughters by Gregory Priest and her new husband, Godbert Godbertson, remember him? The hat maker from the East Country, and their son Samuel. Isaac is surrounded by a tribe of support, mostly women. But what happened to his serving boy, William Latham? He has grown into a young man with lots of troubles, like a publicly unfaithful wife and a neighbor who burns down his house. He eventually returns to England for good, but he later brings a tour group to the Bahamas where they all starve to death. As the crushing debt continues to hang over their heads, Isaac, his father-in-law, his boss, the governor, and 5 others make a pact to personally pay off the communal debt. Some have to sell their homes and livestock to do it. In return, they are granted a monopoly for selling their raw goods. Bradford wrote that Mr. Allerton did them a good and faithful service in these negotiations. However, Isaac is slow to pay his portion. Then sadly little Sarah dies. Then fear dies, followed by her father. In 1644, the loving grandfather died in his bed, in peace amongst the midst of his friends who mourned and wept over him. Governor Bradford takes over rearing Isaac Jr. and his education in preparation for Harvard. Isaac has lost his biggest supporters. As such, he has become something of a pirate, pilfering from the Pilgrims so he can pad his own pocket. I had fun with that one. Governor Bradford finally figures out that he has overcharged them for goods, mishandled the colony's finances, and increased ye debt without ye approval. As a result, the governor fires Isaac as their London business agent. His old friend Edward Winslow is elected governor, while Bradford is demoted to assistant. The next year, his personality and connections help him to get reelected as assistant governor under their new governor, Thomas Prance, his brother-in-law, husband to his wife's sister, Patience. Then Isaac becomes the richest man in Plymouth. He even helps other pilgrims like Stephen Hopkins, former servant Edward Doty, and the Brewsters' former ward, Richard Moore, to get rich too. Although Doty was hauled to court 23 times for fraud, while Moore was lauded for aiding survivors at the abandoned Cape Fear colony and for taking on the raising of a friend's 3 children after the friend died. Isaac might have gotten away with his piracy, but just when the Pilgrims thought they were safe from the likes of hothead Christopher Martin, William Bradford tells us, Isaac brought over at the Pilgrims' expense 2 horribly unsuitable characters, a so-called preacher who acted, quote, crazed in his brain, and Isaac's private secretary, an instrument of mischief who had to be deported for his bad behavior. Even his old friend, Edward Winslow, condemned him as my old neighbor, Isaac, whose head is always full of such projects and have too great a familiarity with our common adversaries, meaning France and Netherlands. So Isaac figures now's a good time to leave town and hit the road, Jack, as a merchant trading not only with England, but other colonies, including Jamestown in Virginia, Manhattan in New Amsterdam, and Boston in Massachusetts Bay, where Moses Maverick came with his father, a Puritan minister, and falls for a young woman named Remember, all grown up. They tie the knot and move to the outskirts of Salem, where they eventually have 5 girls and 1 boy. Robert Cushman of Cushman and Carver, who found the money men, also has a son, Thomas Cushman, who comes over on the fortune as a young teen. After he and little Mary both grow up, they fall in love. Staying in Plymouth, they will eventually have 8 children and 55 grandchildren. She survives until 1699 as the longest living person who got on the Mayflower. All the while, Isaac's business development theme seems to be innovation no matter ye downside. After he is found responsible for a series of risky business decisions that drive the colony deeper into debt, leadership finally votes to banish the former assistant governor from Plymouth before he even pays off his debt. Get ye out of town. His oldest son, Bartholomew, returns to Britain in disgrace. He becomes a vicar in Ireland and marries Margaret, last name unknown. By 1645, he moves back to England and becomes a vicar in Suffolk for the reviled Church of England. He marries Sarah Fairfax, has 4 children, including son Isaac, named after his father, perhaps as a sign of forgiveness. But he never returns to Plymouth and dies at only 45. Always a man with a dream and a woman in his life, Isaac follows Remember and Moses and their growing Maverick family, 55 miles north to the shiny new hamlet of Marblehead. You have to say it like that, Marblehead. And generously includes her husband Moses when he starts New England's cod fishing industry. I'm sure it started with more than one fishing pole. First building trading stations on the Kennebec and Penobscot rivers with the French, he and Moses then sail into Marblehead to buy fishing boats and build a warehouse with an innovation: lodgings for the fishermen. Within a year, they have 8 boats and men fishing the harbor. They expand their industry up to Nova Scotia, and down to the Caribbean. Yo, man. Unfortunately, a series of Indian raids, fires, and losses at sea, plus more questionable friendships like in Marymount, you got to look that one up on your own, caused the authorities in Marblehead to order Isaac out of the entire state of Massachusetts. Moses, however, was welcome and continued to build New England's fishing industry. What now for Isaac? Ever the optimist, he looks around and sees the future in Manhattan, in the colony of New Amsterdam. After Henry Hudson explored the area in 1609, the Dutch began trading for furs and other commodities. Once the West India Company began, they encouraged settlement by giving away large tracts of land. International commerce quickly followed, and Isaac was getting in on the ground floor. In New Amsterdam, they speak Dutch, just like him, and he becomes friends with Peter Stuyvesant, the Dutch governor, just like him. Isaac is granted burgher privileges again, giving him the right to vote and buy and sell land. He grows his bank account by flipping property. In fact, he builds and sells this grand house, which eventually becomes the English governor's mansion. He is back. During his time in the city, the Wall of Wall Street is built. The canal that would become Broadway Street is built, and trading for furs and tobacco becomes a critical need that he's willing to fill. Isaac is so successful, he can help little Mary and Thomas and their growing Cushman family by generously giving them the paper on a 100-pound debt that is owed to him, a year's wages when they collect it. He also builds a second home in the shiny new hamlet of New Haven, Connecticut. While he also lives and trades in Manhattan, Isaac is now bi-colonial. He travels internationally to ports in England and the Netherlands, Curacao and Barbados, Virginia and Canada. He has learned how to get along with everyone, even those who are feuding. Isaac often serves the governors of all the colonies as an international emissary and intercolonial merchant mariner. Speaking multiple languages, he works as a translator and a courier, carrying passengers, important documents, and letters of credit between the Dutch, English, and Swedish colonies. Swedish? New Sweden, along the Delaware River in what will eventually become Pennsylvania. Though dense with forest, it is a natural spot to trade with natives, bringing furs from the interior in their canoes. The Swedes, desperate to clear land, bring Finnish woodsmen for the colony with a unique burn beating technique, where they cut down a tree and an area of the forest, burn the stumps and the undergrowth, and then farm the newly enriched soil. They use log cabins, which were the first log cabins in the New World. But the Swedes in Fort Christina are feuding with the Dutch just up the river in Manhattan, so it's tricky navigating the factions. Isaac, however, learns to work with both, and he becomes a trustworthy trading partner. He sells to Swedish sailor merchants bound for Europe 13,000 pounds of Virginia tobacco at 9 stevers per pound. For comparison, back when Isaac was still in Leiden, a tobacco merchant was taken to court for charging 50 stevers per pound for rolls of tobacco. But the Swedes were worried that they wouldn't get the 16 stevers that they need to make it worth their while. Isaac thought it through and arranged to give them a credit for any shortfalls in sales if needed. Win-win. I don't think he invented win-win, but he certainly utilized it, especially when he developed a creative way to encourage return business throughout New England. First, he would bring and sell staples such as vinegar for preserving food and hops for brewing beer to the Swedes in Fort Christina on credit to ensure that when he returned with new supplies, he would be welcomed. While there, he would buy goods with cash to resell. When he got to Manhattan with these goods, he would sell them using credit, and the cycle begins again. He would collect the payments once they sold the goods, thus ensuring that the colonies would enjoy continual visits from the traders as they would return to redeem the credit. For these and other revolutionary practices that he created and have become commonplace today, Isaac Allerton has been called the father of New England commerce. And because people owed him money all over New England, he builds a steady income stream. All he has to do is to collect the payments. Isaac's experience, knowledge, and fairness earns the trust of Dutch merchants who repeatedly ask him to arbitrate disputes as a referee. Isaac is a legal beagle. Isaac is a friend for all. For example, when he acted as defense attorney for a drunken Dutch sailor after the man insulted the New Haven magistrates who were judging him, causing them to throw the book at the drunk. You think? Isaac used the diminished capacity defense, appropriate, to keep his friend out of jail. He also got the fine cut in half and even posted the sailor's bond. And he worked to be an enemy to none. For example, when a pinnace carrying 3 New England Puritan ministers foundered off Long Island, Isaac saved them, then sailed them in his own boat to southern Virginia, where they were headed. Then, of course, he stayed to trade with the tobacco merchants, always taking advantage of any situation. When New Sweden's governor, John Prince, was criticized for mishandling the trial of a fur trader, he asked Isaac to serve on America's first international tribunal. Along with Swedes, Finns, and Dutchmen, he functioned as an impartial observer, protecting the interests of New England. In 1643, the 56-year-old Isaac marries his third and final wife, Joanna Swinnerton. Like the other women in his life, she is also a good influence on him. In 1646, with her encouragement, he buys a small triangle of waterfront property in Manhattan on the East River, where he builds a 2-story warehouse and a dock known as Allerton's Wharf. It quickly becomes profitable as the favorite place for English traders, especially since in this Dutch colony, they speak English there, and the Brooklyn Ferry is just next door. By 1655, Isaac becomes the 6th wealthiest man in this entire wealthy colony, and many people are indebted to him. In a gesture of peace and goodwill, Isaac gives his Plymouth lands, goods, and cattle to Plymouth leadership to finally repay all his debts there. Maybe 5 years late, but better late than never. Meanwhile, the great Puritan, England, Oliver Cromwell, who ordered the execution of King Charles I, as you may recall, has sent 900 men on 4 warships and 2 merchant ships with a plan to seize Manhattan by force. When the ships first arrive in Boston Harbor, Isaac learns that the attack will begin in a few weeks. He quickly sails down to Manhattan to see Peter Stuyvesant to share this intelligence. The Dutch begin to assemble a force to defend their colony. When Cromwell hears of this planned repulse, he signs a treaty with the Dutch and the attack is called off. Isaac Allerton is now a Dutch hero, saving both Dutch and English lives. He has also learned to work with the natives. He discovered that the Lenni Lenape people near Fort Christina value wampum beads, handmade from clamshells by the Narragansetts, whom he knows from Plymouth. Even though he has access to English knockoffs, he uses the good wampum exclusively. He also pays with tools, kettles, and cloth. As a result, he is able to purchase quality beaver pelts and furs from the Lenni Lenape. In New Haven, he and Joanna build a stately home with 4 porches, an orchard, and barn on 2 acres of meadow overlooking a creek. They even join a church. Trusting his debtors to make the payments on the thousands owed to him, he continues trading voyages and visits to his warehouse in Manhattan. When war seems imminent between the Dutch and the Swedes, at his Manhattan home, Isaac arranges peace talks between the leaders. However, Stuyvesant's Dutch flotilla is what encourages Sweden to finally surrender. That very day, 600 Susquehannock, natives and allies of Sweden, retaliate by raiding Manhattan, beginning at Isaac's warehouse, where they burst the lock, beat his servants, and showed great insolence to the 69-year-old Mr. Allerton. He tries to convince them that he was also a friend of the Swedes, but what convinces them to leave is the Dutch ship aiming their guns at them. It's always good to have backup. With all his creative thinking, he failed to foresee the consequences of war and the merchants' evacuation at Fort Christina. Meanwhile, his son, Isaac Jr., after graduating Harvard in the class of 50, moves the 133 miles to New Haven to work with his father. In 1652, Jr. marries a New Haven girl named Elizabeth and has 2 children. Seizing opportunity like his father before him, Junior buys speculator land 600 miles away in Virginia. His wife dies a few years later, so he moves his son and daughter to his land on the northern beaches of Virginia, where he meets and marries a rich widow named Elizabeth. Makes it easy, and had three more children. Junior becomes a colonel in the Virginia militia and second in command to John Washington, grandfather of George. The owner of several businesses and a plantation, Isaac Jr. is elected to the House of Burgesses and good neighbors with Lee's and the Washingtons, who, of course, become future leaders, for the rest of his 75 years, leaving many Allerton descendants in Virginia, like Zachary Taylor, hero of the Mexican War and 12th President of the United States. In 1658, Isaac Sr. and Joanna moved permanently to New Haven. He spends much of his time reminiscing, thinking about his family in back in England, and in the Netherlands, and in Plymouth, like his daughter, Remember, who has just died. Thinking about the historic voyage and his life as the assistant governor and chief negotiator for the fledgling colony. Recalling his successes in the fishing industry as an interpreter and trader, always developing innovative solutions to the problem at hand. Isaac and Joanna spend the last years of his life peacefully awaiting payment on the many debts owed to him. On a cold February day in 1659, Isaac dies at age 73. He is buried in the old burying ground in New Haven without a monument nor a gravestone. The payments never came. Sadly, his debtors came and quickly took possession of his house right from under Joanna. His equally creative son, Isaac Jr., understood the debt his father had to his women. He quickly goes to the debtors and buys back his father's home, giving it to his stepmother, who lives there for another 22 years. When she dies, the house goes to Isaac's oldest granddaughter, Elizabeth Eyre, whose grandfather-in-law founded Harvard University and Cambridge, Massachusetts. Isaac Allerton left quite a legacy. Maybe a bit of a fallen saint, but he was also a devoted family man, likable team member, dogged assistant, shrewd negotiator, heroic spy, economic innovator, successful entrepreneur, trusting partner, a seer of the future, except when it came to war. Now that we've added more color to the Isaac Allerton story, where do you judge this most complex figure of all the Pilgrims? That's where I put him.